Greetings, my name is Matt, and if you are a regular on the channel, you are probably saying to yourself, WTF, because we are going to do on a 1994 Nissan Pathfinder here, a ball joint replacement, not a typical thing we do on this channel. Why are we doing this? Well, two reasons. First of all, after my last series diagnosing that intermittent IAC problem, I wanted to do something a little easier. But I also took on this challenge because the second reason I am doing this is the owner states that the mechanic he normally goes to is charging an exorbitant amount because apparently these are a completely different design that are very intricate or whatever, and therefore a considerably higher expense to replace ball joints than on most typical models. So not believing that I am going to fail at this challenge, I told him that I would do this for the normal price that I would charge. Let's see if I get burned on this, and more importantly, let's see if we can't just use regular fundamentals and just reasoning skills to figure our way out this, despite the fact that I have no manual, and also I checked and there is nothing on YouTube that shows how to do this particular model. The models change significantly later on in around 98 where it's a more typical design, but the point of this is, like the point of the channel, to show you that you do not need YouTube to replace parts and remove bolts. You can figure it out if you just use basic common sense. We'll see if that applies to this challenge. Disclaimer. The following feature is not intended to be harsh on beginners. It's actually meant to encourage beginners and challenge them to go beyond their usual comfort level and realize the only way you're ever going to improve at auto mechanics, or anything for that matter, is to adventure beyond your usual comfort level and try to figure out things and experience challenges for yourself. The feature is, however, intended to be harsh on beginners who think that they know things because they saw a video on YouTube, or they read a Haynes manual, or saw a Saturday morning car show or something like that, and they think they're qualified to give advice on the internet when they've never even turned a wrench on the matter. So, that said, enjoy. All right, the first and most important thing is diagnosing that we need ball joints on this, because as you know on this channel, we never just replace parts on a guess. We diagnose that those parts are what need replacing. One of the ways that I'll do this, I'll grab from the bottom and the top of the tire, not at 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock because the steering wheel is going to be involved with this, but top and bottom, and see if I can rock and I can feel a lot of motion. I can actually hear the ball joints clicking. You can also look behind the wheel if you have somebody else do this, and you'll sometimes see the ball joints moving pretty loosely in there. And the other thing is, by having my friend hold the steering wheel still, when I move side to side, you can also feel a lot of play here, probably indicating loose tie rod ends. So we'll have to do an inspection when we get this wheel off and see what is involved. So let's go ahead and do that. First thing we notice is we've got a captive rotor design. I have only seen these once before, and it was a rather miserable experience, I will admit, although this looks a little simpler. I am not quite familiar with this at all, actually, but I can see my blown out ball joint up top here. Let me give you a look at that. So we can see a gaping hole here in the rubber, and we can also see, if we look around, let me get a light. So we can see the sway bar bushings are completely cracked, and I am sure that the other side is going to be similar to this. Let's see our tie rod ends here. Tie rod ends actually feel pretty tight. I still recommended that he replaces the tie rod ends, so we got all the parts we need, but we're going to do ball joints and tie rod ends. Now that I see these bushings here on the sway bar right there, how bad those look, I probably am going to recommend that he replaces those as well at some point. Those will be easy to replace without having to do much dismantling. So anyway, let's get going on this rotor here. All right, the theme for the video. I'm going to be removing bolts that are holding parts that are in the way of my goal. It's going to take a lot of spatial reasoning skills, I know, but that is the philosophy that I'm going to go with. The first thing I think I'm going to have to do is take this brake caliper off, so let's go ahead and start there. Well, it won't come off. there has to be bolts holding it on. I better check YouTube, see if anybody can teach me how to remove bolts. Or better yet, looks like there's a bolt here and a bolt here. Let's see what happens if I remove those. This bolt down here just keeps spinning and spinning and spinning, and I can't get it out. I'm going to have to call on my incredible spatial reasoning skills and take a wrench and hold it onto the part that is spinning that the bolt goes through. I know, I don't know how anybody would be expected to figure this out. Oh my God, it's loose. I must have done something right. Now, that brake caliper looks like crap. Probably wouldn't be a bad idea to replace that thing either. But let me go ahead and tie this up out of the way so it doesn't hang by the hose and possibly break the hose. This vehicle has over 300,000 miles on it, so I'm going to be a little bit careful expecting a lot of things to be sort of brittle and stuff like that. All right, let's see. We have new looking brake pads here that were placed onto rotors that were not resurfaced. You can see very deeply the grooves in the brake pads. Very typical on a lot of the cars that I get from people. Wow, it's really grooved on this back one here. And that is because a lot of people just simply put pads on the car. I'm sure that also these rotors are very warped, which probably is also contributing to the steering problems. But let's see, we're still going to have to get this caliper bracket off here. And once again, relying on my amazing spatial reasoning skills, it must be this bolt and this bolt to be removed. Wow, can't you just watch these bolts coming out all day long like this? Better yet, stop watching YouTube, put the Haynes manual away, and actually do this. And that way, the next time when you go online and give advice to people on how to do it, you'll actually know what you're talking about. All it takes is just a little confidence to know that you're going to be able to put it back together when you're done. That's the thing that mostly keeps people from trying stuff like this. Certainly doesn't keep them from giving advice on it, though, that's for sure. One trick that I do, very often I will, if I've never done a job before, I put the bolts right back into the part that I removed so I know which bolts go where. But once you get used to doing this for a while, you quickly realize that you can just take a pile of bolts and know where they go just simply by the shape and design of them. Here I admit I am not familiar with this design, but I'm going to probably use my spatial reasoning skills and determine that because there are some Allen bolts here and because there are bolts here and these bolts clearly go into the rotor, that I am probably not actually going to have to remove these bolts, but I'm probably going to have to remove these bolts because this cap must somehow help to be keeping this rotor in place. Again, I don't know for sure, but sometimes you just have to figure things out. Interesting, by the way, I just noticed right here we're missing one of those Allen bolts. So clearly somebody has been in here before. Hopefully somebody who is a lot smarter than I am. Actually, I know the other guy was not smarter than I am because he forgot one of the bolts. But let's see if I've got a Allen thing here big enough for this. I am afraid I may not. That one works. All right. And wow, these are on really tight. Well, we've got two problems here. One of them, these are on extremely tight, and I don't have anything other than this Allen block here in that size. And the second thing is if I really torque this too much, I'm going to break my Allen block. Oh no, we're doomed. the project is over. We'll need a professional. There's no possible way, since there's nothing on YouTube that's going to help me, and it's not going to be in a Haynes manual, that we're going to be able to finish this project now, unless I can actually come up with an idea. All right, let's try this. I'm going to put a couple of these lug nuts on to protect the threads of the lugs. Put a pry bar in there. Then I'm going to rest that on my knee and get a wrench the size of the Allen. And I don't want the wrench to fly off. So we're going to tape it into place. And then let's position this strategically. And the idea is I'm going to see if I can break this loose by hitting the wrench. All right, that actually worked out pretty well. All right, after taking all the bolts out, I can still feel it sticking on here, so I'm going to take this off kind of slow because I am not sure what's behind it. But let's get a screwdriver in there, see if we can pry this off. Okay, and it is obvious to me now what the problem is, why this thing is not coming off so easily. And that is, remember that missing bolt? Well, it's not missing. It was broken off, and it's still right there. So the guy before me is not winning any points from me, I will tell you that. Now I got to get this guy out. All right, thank you, previous person, for making this so much easier. Normally, there would be a big nut on there, which obviously is the purpose of that cap that I just removed. So my guess is this is going to be one of those old bearing designs, which I've actually seen only in a Haynes manual before, but never actually dealt with them. But this bearing is being retained somehow, and I can see that this rotor's not going to come off unless I can remove this. So let's see here. Actually, I can feel, while I'm trying to clean this up and look for it, there is a retaining ring right there. All right, yeah, I can spin this retaining ring around, and that, I believe, oh yeah, that's definitely a snap ring is what that is. All right, so let's see what happens if we remove that snap ring. Now, obviously, the elephant in the room, why not remove these bolts? And that's because I believe that this assembly, actually, you can do that and separate this assembly from the rotor, but I'm not interested in doing that right now. I just want to get this rotor out of the way because I have to get, I have to get this thing through, because to get my lower ball joint bolts out, I have to get this drive shaft out of the way. So I need to get this retaining ring out. And I may be wrong about all this, I admit, but it's all part of just learning. There goes the retaining ring. All right, now we got a whole bunch of loose parts here. Let's see, well, this comes out now, but let's see what we've got. There's the important thing is to keep your orientation here. All right, so let's see. There is several parts in here, I see. So what I'm going to do is keep the orientation of those so that I remember how to put this back together in the same way. All right, let's see if we can figure out this other part here. There's two screws. One here and on the other side. And in my experience, these generally strip very easily. So I am going to proactively do something about that. And that is, I'm going to use an impact screwdriver here that I'm hoping should break these loose. All right. All right, in my experience, without doing it this way, you are going to strip them so bad you're going to have to drill them out. And now I admit this is definitely not going to come out. This thing retains. Let's see, it spins a little bit loose here, so it looks like it should come out. So let's see if we can remove this thing. Okay, and let me put that. Then let me put that in the order that I removed everything else, so I can make sure I know where it goes back. And I can see there's another ring back here. Let's see if this ring also will come out. I will admit this is a rather convoluted design, it appears. Okay, and actually I see now what's happening. This part here actually screws on to this hub is what's happening. So it's just screwed on. So all I got to do is just back it out. Let me see if I've got a small screwdriver. All right, so this just screws on, obviously. That is weird, I will admit. Okay, there we go. And then another thing that I have to keep track of, where it goes back. And I always make sure I keep track of the orientation, so this side goes on there first. And now I can see there's a wheel bearing in here. I have never seen this before, but I can now, okay, so now I can move my axle through there. So now I want to see if we can get this rotor off. The rotor is a little bit looser now, but it's not coming off because it looks like the rotor is trapped by this bearing, it looks like. So I do believe I will have to remove these bolts on this rotor captor here. I was hoping to remove that just as one assembly. See, it's okay to be wrong about things, and maybe you have to redo them a little bit, but you can figure your way around it. You don't need YouTube. You don't need a professional mechanic to get you out of something because you're afraid you can't put it back together. Just take notes and do it. I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing here. I just know that it's just bolts and parts, and I'm going to be able to figure it out. Well, it turns out I didn't need to actually remove those bolts, I guess, but I see it was just this bearing trapping it in there. So now we've got a bearing that I've got to keep track of. Obviously, I'm going to also have to re-grease that. All right, and then this should come off. All right. By the way, you can look at the back of this, how deep those grooves are in there. So that's why you're supposed to make sure you have a nice surface on the rotor before you put new pads on. The backs of the pads are going to be grooved just like that now. Looking up top here, we've got 4 bolts that are holding in this upper ball joint, and normally these are riveted and you have to drill them out. But with 300-something thousand miles on this car, obviously this has been done before. So my assumption, if I want to get this ball joint out, I will probably need to remove the bolts that are holding it in. All right, so my aim here is I want to remove this whole steering knuckle because I believe that is going to be the easiest way for me to remove the drive shaft, which will allow me to reach the bolts for the lower ball joint, which I haven't shown yet. Okay, now what I got to do is, let's see here, there's not going to be enough clearance to move that drive shaft out of the way to get to these lower bolts, I don't believe. So what I'm going to do is over on this side, I'm going to remove this tie rod and set it out of the way. And really we also are going to replace this tie rod end, except that I found that he did not buy new tie rod ends as I indicated. He only bought new ball joints. So, but either way, I want to remove this. So My amazing spatial reasoning skills coming into play, observing that there's a cotter pin through the castle nut. And if I do not remove that cotter pin, it will be impossible to unbolt the nut. All right, and before removing that, I want to count the number of threads there, since I do not have a torque specification, to make sure that I put this back the same way, although I am going to be inclined to look up a torque specification because I'm quite confident that the guy before me almost certainly was not very concerned about torque specifications, seeing as how he broke off one of the bolts. All right, if you do not have air tools, these things can sometimes cause a problem in that the nut will just spin and spin and spin because the whole shaft and bolt and everything spins inside the tie rod end. If that happens, there's a couple things you can do. One thing I'll do is wedge something in between the tie rod end and the knuckle, and if you put pressure on that tie rod, other times there's a nut on top of the shaft that you can use a small wrench that you can hold that as a backup. And then there is another way too. Sometimes when the weight of the vehicle, you can reinstall the wheel, use the weight of the vehicle if you don't have anything else that's going to work, and the weight of the vehicle will help to put enough pressure that this won't spin. But anyway you look at it, the air tool is definitely the best way to do this. All right, now to pop this loose, there's a couple ways. One thing, you do not want to mushroom the ends of this, because remember, I do not have a new tie rod end, so I have to reuse this one. One way is to use a tool like this, called a pickle fork, that just basically wedges in there. The trouble is, doing so is going to damage the grease seal. So we cannot use this because we're reusing this tie rod end until the guy gets another one. The second way is to loosely install the castle nut so you don't mushroom the end of the stud, and then see if you can just tap it up with a hammer. And I prefer doing this as opposed to banging around on everything, because remember, I want to be careful of this seal, so I don't want to take a chance at pinching it if I bang, in the wrong place here. And usually this works fine. And it doesn't seem like that's going to work too well. So we'll go to plan C, and plan C is to use, and this in my opinion is the best way anyway, especially a lot of times I'm working with the person who owns the car and they're right by me, and for me to be banging around with a hammer is probably not the most professional looking thing to do. They get a little bit worried about it, but we should hear this pop free pretty soon. Oh, there we go, you hear that pop. There we go. We can just set that out of the way. Now, if we were replacing this tie rod end, which I certainly wanted to do, what we would do is measure from where the tie rod end screws in to the center of the tie rod end. But also what I'm going to do is I am going to mark with paint the threads here. And I'm also going to count the number of threads. So I have several different ways now to ensure that I preserve that location, because it is very obvious, even if you have never done this before, that this must be linked to the steering. And if it is not set exactly the same, then this wheel will either toe in or out more as a result of your changing the tie rod end if you do not put it exactly the same. And that also is not to say you won't need an alignment afterwards. We're just setting it as it was before. That's not to say that it didn't already need an alignment. So just some common sense there. All right, so now with both these ball joints loose, I can swing my CV axle out of the way, and I can access these bolts below for the lower ball joint now. Now, in doing that,